What are you guys doing down there? Come on out. I got to fit pistons today. It's that time in the engine build where we need to fill these holes with the pistons that were designed to go in there. Now, before we can do that, we need to actually gap the piston ring. Now, the reason we gap the ring is because the ring is what seals the piston and the cylinder wall and gives you the combustion pressure and power, effectively. However, to get a piston ring on a piston, it needs a gap to get it around the actual piston itself. Now, when these rings are sat in the cylinder bore, this gap closes up. Now, the distance between the two mating faces of the ring is quite critical. In this application, because we're going supercharged, you tend to run a little bit more cylinder temperature, so the gap in the ring needs to be a little bit wider than it would on a non-supercharged application. So the rough formula is 4 thou for every inch of bore diameter. Now, these bores are 2.8 inches, which works out that gap, when it's in the bore, should be around about 11 to 12 thou. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over to the bench now. I'll show you the setup that I'm doing so we can gap each ring individually and put them on the pistons, and then we can pop the pistons in. So let's go over and have a look at the bench. Here's the way I've set the bench up for doing the job of gapping and installing the pistons. So what we got here are the pistons all laid out in the order that they're going to be going into the engine. Now, this being piston number 1, 2, 3, and over there, number 4. So we've got each set of bearings set there, ready to be installed onto the big end. We've got each ring for each piston. Now, the way I've numbered it is piston number 1, T for top ring, and S for second ring, and the oil ring is the third ring, but we don't need to gap the oil ring, so that can stay as it is. What I'm going to do is gap each ring and then put it back over its corresponding hole and give it a bit of a tick so I know I've done that ring. I've got an old piston here, which what I'm going to use when I actually gap the ring, I'm going to put the ring in the bore. I'm going to use the old piston with an old ring on it just to push down the board to make sure I square the ring into the cylinder, to make sure that every time I measure it, it's in exactly the same place, so I'm getting an accurate reading with my feeler gauges as I'm taking a bit of material off the ring. Okay, so let's give it a go. Let's gap ring number 1, and then we'll see how we get on. This is cylinder number 1, and this is the top ring for piston number 1. Now, on the actual piston ring itself, I'm not sure if you can see that, but there's a little letter N, and that means any writing goes to the top. So we make sure we put the piston ring in the correct way round with this writing to the top first of all, and then we gently insert the piston ring into the bore. Now, you've got to be really careful because they are quite fragile, and you can easily break a ring, and if we break a ring, we're screwed. So we've just got him started in the bore. So what I'm going to do now is get the old piston, gently put it in the bore and push it down until it sits home on the old ring, and we know now that piston ring is nice and square in the bore. Now, off camera, I did measure the gap in this one, so I know that the gap at the moment with the feeler gauge is 7 thou. Okay, so that's a 7 thou feeler gauge. Now, what we need is a gap in that ring of between 11 and 12 thou. So we need to take a few thou off that one. So let's pop the ring back out, take him over to the ring grinder, and then we'll show you what we do to grind the ring. This is the ring grinding tool we're going to use. It's only a little cheapy. I got it on eBay, not a lot of money, but it'll do the job that we need to do. So how does it work? We get our piston ring, we lie it on the tool, push him up against the 2 posts to make sure he's equal about around a little grinding stone, and then just put a tiny bit of pressure on. Now, the thing with this is all going to be about feel, because we did have a little play with one of the old rings off the old pistons, and we sort of worked out that with a certain amount of pressure, one rotation was 1 thou removed from each end of the ring, or from both ends, combined ends of the ring. So what we're going to do now is we're going to push him gently onto the stone, and like I said, this is a very hands-on feely job, and then we're going to wind that round, and I'll do 1 turn for now, and then we'll go measure it, put it back in the block and measure it, see what we got, and it'll give us a feel for how many times we need to turn this round then to take off about 5 thou in total, I think. So let's give it 1 turn. and we'll see what difference that makes. Now, the eagle-eyed view may well have spotted that I'm now in cylinder number 2, and I'll go into that at the end of the video. But anyway, let's see what we've got after our initial grind. And that's a tight 10 thou. So we've got a couple of thou to come off of there. What I'm going to go and do, I'll finish this ring off, I'll do the rest, pop them on the pistons, and then the next stage will be going into popping the pistons in. So yeah, that's all the rings gap for each piston, 1, 2, 3 and 4. They're all laid out here now with a little ticks by them to say I've done them, so I know that if I stop to, you know, answer the phone or whichever, or if you get disturbed or maybe just want a cup of tea, you can always come back and you know exactly where you are and which ones you've done and which ones you haven't. So what we need to do now is fit the rings to the actual pistons. Now I've already fitted the oil ring because it's a pretty straightforward job and you can do it without any tools. So it's a pretty straightforward and you can suss that out. It's not a problem. But the next 2 rings, number 1, or top ring and middle ring, you do need to use a little tool to separate the ring. If you try and do it by hand, you can break the ring and snap it. I've not done it yet, but I know it's a thing. So what we need to do, second ring down. So this is the doing from the bottom and work up. So this is the second ring, which is a cast iron ring. Now on the actual ring itself, I'm not sure if you can see that, but it says top. So we know that that is the upward facing the cylinder head effectively, or top of the bore. So let's get our little ring pliers. Now we only need to get right on the edge here, and then gently. Now we don't want to go too far with this. We don't want to, you know, open it up to just enough to get it over the top. So we're going to open them up just enough, and then easily drop the ring down. Now it's awkward doing this, trying to do the camera as well, but it's pretty much there. And the next one. So that's the first ring in. We'll do the same with the top ring. Now on the top ring, it doesn't actually say top, but reading the instructions, it just says any writing, any lettering is the top of the ring. So this one's got an N, not sure if you can see that. It's got the letter N on it. Now we'll give this one a quick clean. I did clean that one before I started the camera, and they've all been deburred as well, so every ring is effectively ready to go. Now the reason these rings have got to go in a certain orientation, that way round, is because there are slight grooves or angles on them for scraping the bore and sealing and whatever else. So that's why it's imperative that you actually put the ring the correct way round. You know, so let's quickly get that one in the old tool. I'll do this one looking and down on it because it is easier. I don't want to break a ring at this stage in the game. Now the ring is on, just a tiny little, and there we go, that's the ring fitted. Now what we do before we put the pistons in, and I will do this, each gap in the ring should be offset to one another. So if you can see there, you've got the 2 gaps for the top and bottom ring, roughly in line with each other. Now actually when you set this up to go in the block, we're going to rotate these rings so that they're at sort of 90 degrees. So the bottom 2 rings, which are the oil seal rings, we'll set those at 90 degrees, the gaps to one another. And then with these ones here, or that'll be 180 degrees. On these ones, we'll do these 180 degrees, but at 90 degrees to the bottom one. Let me go and do the rest of these a minute. And what I'll do then, we'll stick the bearings in the rods and we'll pop them in the block. We're about ready to drop the pistons in the block now, but before we do, we need to give each bore a thoroughly good clean, because we've got the old favourite brake clean, lint-free rag. And let's just get down there as far as I can with my fat hands and give the bores a good old clean. Now, what you notice in the cylinder bores on any new engine build, the bores are bored and then honed, and then on the hone they put like a crosshatch pattern in the hone, and part of that is to do with the grooves, just tiny grooves in the crosshatch. They help to bed the piston rings in when you start the engine, and second, and equally as importantly, is they do trap oil in they're like microscopic grooves, you know, like little scratches, I suppose, if you can describe it as that. And those little grooves do trap oil, which lubricates the piston, which it clearly needs, and gives the engine a nice long life, hopefully. So, right, let me finish cleaning this bore up, and then we'll pop a piston in. Piston number 1. We're about to put this one in the block. a couple of things to do first of all. A is we need to put some bearings on it. Now, over here I've got the bearings, they're all nice and clean, and it's pretty much the same procedure as I did when I put the crank and stuff in. Again, you've got like a tang on there, if you can see that, which locates into the rod itself, and there's a similar one on the journal, on the cap rather. So what we do is to pop them in. I've already pre-cleaned this, it's all nice and clean as we did before. I do a lot of this off camera because it's a little bit on the tedious side watching people clean stuff. So let's pop this one in. Okay, so we've orientated the rings as well. As I said before, all the rings are at 90 degrees to one another. Now what we're also going to do, even though we've just cleaned the bore, we are going to put some oil in there because it's just going to help get the piston and the ring down in there. So give that a bit of a coating of oil. Now this is the piston insert tool. So what we're going to do, we're going to give this a good oiling as well. And the way this works, if you look in the top there's a taper in the top. So as you push the piston in, it compresses the rings to where they need to be. You drop that over the hole, it compresses the rings, and as you go down further and further, it just pops it in there with all the rings nicely compressed. Now, on a Mini, or the A-Series engine, what you notice is the piston, or the con rod, is what they call swan neck. So instead of being straight up and down, it's actually the journal's offset. So there is a certain orientation that these pistons go in, so they can't go in the wrong way around. So this one's going to go in that way, and the way we know that, we've already set these up on the bench to know which way to go in. And we wrote F1 on the piston itself. So this means this is piston number 1, and the F is the front of the engine. So this side of the piston needs to face the front of the engine, so that we know that the orientation is right, and that swan neck is the correct way around. So we're going to put a little bit of oil on the rings as well, to help it all in the skirt, to help it all slide into place, hopefully without moving the ring around the piston, because we'd have to go and reset it all. Now I'll give it one last check before I do, to make sure it's where it needs to be. So that's there, on the other side there, yeah, and 90 degrees to that, we've got that gap, and 90 degrees to that then, or 180 degrees to that, we've got that gap. So we're there, so okay. So we can now insert this piston. We need a little bit of tube to protect the crankshaft from the actual bolts. The last thing we want to do is push it in and then damage the journal with the bolts, but I managed to find some plastic caps from one of those silicone things. So they're going to go on there to protect the journal when we're pushing them through. So now we're going to just gently check we got F1 that way. Gently drop the piston into the hole. Ooh, there she goes. We'll make sure that the crank journal is right at the bottom, and I have cleaned the journals as well. They're all nice and clean. Now we'll feel for the rod coming out through the bottom. Right, she's in the hole. There you go. As you can see, those two plastic covers are protecting the journal as we're putting the piston in. So we'll just keep tapping. Right, she's home. All we need to do now, I'll tell you what else we need to do quickly. Let's put a little bit of oil on the actual journal. Let's put some oil on the journal. Let that run down. Sorry, forgot that in my excitement to get a con rod in there. But we'll be all right. We'll be all right. Right, that's that home. Just going to pop the cap on now, and I'll give this a bit of a lubrication first. But what we're going to do, to make sure we get the cap the right way, what we did in advance was we actually numbered the con rod number 1 and the cap number 1, so we know the orientation is correct. So let's just pop this one on. Here we go, these on. Now, what we need to do now is put the two nuts on. A little bit of ARP lube first, as recommended. And then these get torqued up to 35 foot-pounds. Oh, it's all moving. $35, just double check. 35, 35, there we go. Number one piston in. And it all rotates lovely. Look at that, the way it should do. I'm going to go on now and do the other three. And I'll join you in a minute. Well, there you go, guys. That's 4 pistons fitted into the little block. So we're moving along, which is good. Except for one thing. There's actually not 4 pistons in, there's only 3. Because Mr. Idiot here, Mr. Heavy Hands, broke a bloody ring putting one in, didn't I? So, order a new ring. I'll recap this ring, fit it to this piston, and then we'll finally get it in the block. But that was all I was going to do today anyway, was put the pistons in. So effectively, it's a bit of a success, although one small setback. Next time, we're going to be setting it true top dead center on the number one, and we'll be timing up the camshaft. That's a bit of a technical one, so I'm going to do a bit of study between now and then. Try not to screw anything up, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks for watching, guys. Again, feel free to like, subscribe. It's all free, and hopefully you're enjoying what you're seeing, including the screw-ups. So anyway, nothing hidden there. See you next time, guys.